He's not telling the truth, that's right. Now, why do you come out here? You start off, Johnny's last thing, you start off, you do a great job with Johnny, and then you say something that's not true to this audience. Why do you do that?
For over 3 decades, Johnny Carson was the smiling face of late-night television, a consummate professional who made millions laugh while chatting with Hollywood's biggest stars. But what audiences didn't know was that behind the scenes, Carson kept a private mental blacklist of celebrities he found truly despicable. To viewers, he was polite and welcoming. Off camera, he quietly confided in close friends and longtime colleagues about the stars he couldn't stand. Those who, in his eyes, were not just difficult, but morally repugnant. These weren't minor clashes or diva tantrums. They were behaviors so toxic, Carson believed they revealed something deeply wrong with a person's character. Whether it was cruelty to staff, unchecked ego, or disturbing backstage conduct, Carson took note. And though he rarely let the public see that side, those close to him say he never forgot how people treated those with less power. For Carson, that told the real story.
I'm sick about hearing of runaway productions and costs, and the star system, and how we need government subsidies.
To the audience, Frank Sinatra's appearances on The Tonight Show were electric, filled with charisma, laughter, and iconic stories. But behind that dazzling charm, Johnny Carson saw something else entirely, a bully cloaked in celebrity. According to Carson and several longtime staff members, Sinatra was one of the most unsettling guests to ever walk through the studio doors, not because of his talent, but because of how he wielded his fame like a weapon. Sinatra often arrived flanked by a group of imposing men, an entourage that more closely resembled a private security detail than showbiz assistants. Their presence turned the studio into what one cameraman described as a surveillance zone, creating tension the moment they entered. Crew members reported being watched, scrutinized, and occasionally intimidated. But it was Sinatra's personal behavior that truly bothered Carson. During one taping, a floor manager gave the standard 3-minute cue before the segment. Sinatra responded by grabbing the man's tie, pulling him close, and growling, "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes." Carson, watching on a monitor, nearly canceled the segment on the spot, only relenting after producers reminded him of the ratings Sinatra would bring. The final straw came during a commercial break when Sinatra made a demeaning remark about a female staffer's appearance. Carson, breaking his usual detached demeanor, snapped, "We don't talk about my staff that way here." Sinatra was visibly stunned. From that moment forward, Carson instructed producers to limit Sinatra's appearances to once a year, an almost unheard of move from a host who rarely interfered with guest bookings. Carson respected Sinatra's talent but despised the way he treated people. To Johnny, the true measure of a person wasn't how they acted on stage, it was how they behaved when the spotlight was off.
And violence always has been part of our story. It is, I've seen it in my own lifetime long before this period, and we certainly read about it in history.
Orson Welles was a cinematic genius, a legendary director, actor, and storyteller whose presence on The Tonight Show always promised something memorable. But according to Johnny Carson and his production team, Welles brought more than just brilliance to the studio. He brought a level of ego that made him one of the most difficult guests in the show's history. From the moment Welles arrived, he dismissed the structure of the program entirely. He refused to follow the list of prepared questions, crossing out every one and handing back a blank page. Carson, usually meticulously prepared, was forced to improvise interviews with one of Hollywood's most complex figures, often with no idea where the conversation would go. Worse, Welles routinely ignored time limits. In one appearance, he was scheduled for a 7-minute segment, but rambled on for nearly 25 minutes, forcing 2 other guests to be cut from the show. His arrogance didn't stop at the host's desk. Staff members said Welles refused to speak directly to assistants, referring to them in the third person. "Tell the girl I need water," or "have the boy adjust the light." His most audacious moment came when he stood up during a taping and attempted to direct the camera crew himself, barking instructions as if it were his own film set. Carson, who was famously protective of his show's format, was livid. Privately, Carson admitted he admired Welles's talent, but found his behavior intolerable. "Genius doesn't excuse everything," he reportedly told Ed McMahon. "Being brilliant doesn't give you the right to hijack someone else's show." For Carson, Wells became the cautionary tale of what happens when unchecked ego overshadows respect. Behind the mythic persona was a man who seemed to believe the rules simply didn't apply to him, and that Johnny couldn't stand.
Well, they're all still living and working.
But perhaps not doing quite so well as they were formerly.
Oh, I don't know. You know, Rosanna Brazzi was in this film, and he's done 87 films. Did you know
Yes.
that?
To viewers at home, Joan Crawford was the epitome of old Hollywood elegance, poised, glamorous, and impossibly composed. Her appearances on The Tonight Show were masterclasses in charm, with every smile, laugh, and response seemingly effortless. But according to Johnny Carson and multiple members of his production staff, that on-camera persona was a calculated performance, one that hid a much darker reality. Behind the scenes, Crawford was described as cold, controlling, and outright cruel to those she deemed beneath her. Her demands were excessive before she even set foot in the studio. Specific lighting instructions ran 4 pages long. The temperature had to be set to exactly 67 degrees. She brought her own makeup team, dismissing the show's award-winning artists. But her true character, Carson believed, was exposed in one unforgettable moment. When a young assistant entered her dressing room to deliver water, something Crawford herself had requested, she exploded. Witnesses say she verbally assaulted the 20-year-old so viciously that nearby staff froze in shock. Crawford allegedly called her a brainless little active and suggested she'd be better suited to working in a brothel. Carson was horrified. Though he remained professional during the interview, he confided to Ed McMahon afterward, "I've interviewed corpses with more personality." During commercial breaks, Crawford would drop her smile and sit stone-faced in silence, only to spring back to life when the cameras rolled again. The chilling transformation was unsettling. Years later, when Mommy Dearest was released and revealed allegations of Crawford's abuse toward her adopted children, Carson simply nodded and said, "I believe every word." For Carson, Joan Crawford was a stark example of how Hollywood glamour could be weaponized to hide something much colder underneath. A reputation polished in public, but poisoned in private. Mickey Rooney was once the biggest star in Hollywood, a box office titan in the 1930s and a living relic of the Golden Age. His appearances on The Tonight Show should have been nostalgic tributes to a legendary career. But according to Johnny Carson and his staff, Rooney's visits quickly became known for all the wrong reasons. Behind the scenes, Rooney had a troubling reputation, particularly with young female staff members. Multiple production assistants reported that he routinely made suggestive comments, grabbed hands, and held onto wrists a little too long. One assistant recalled how bringing him water turned into an uncomfortable exchange, with Rooney asking if she was married and pulling her closer. Word quickly spread and many staff members would ask to be reassigned whenever his name appeared on the guest list. To make matters worse, Rooney often arrived visibly intoxicated. His speech would slur, his thoughts would drift mid-sentence, and he'd lose track of where he was in a story. During one infamous segment, Rooney began sharing an anecdote about Judy Garland that veered into inappropriate territory, forcing Carson to abruptly change the subject. During the commercial break, Johnny turned to his producer and asked, "Is he drunk, or is this just who he is now?" What made the situation especially difficult was the generational gap. Born in 1920, Rooney came from an era where certain behaviors were dismissed as harmless fun. But Carson drew a hard line. After Rooney made a series of inappropriate comments about a young actress during taping, Johnny personally apologized to her, something staff said was extremely rare. From then on, Carson insisted that any Rooney appearances be taped earlier in the day to minimize risk. For Johnny, nostalgia was never an excuse for bad behavior, especially when it made others feel unsafe. Bette Davis was a Hollywood icon, sharp-witted, fiercely intelligent, and undeniably talented. On The Tonight Show, she dazzled viewers with biting humor and unforgettable stories from her storied career. But behind the scenes, Johnny Carson and his crew encountered a very different version of the silver screen legend, one that was combative, abrasive, and often downright cruel. According to multiple Tonight Show staff members, Davis didn't just dominate conversations, she bulldozed through them. When booked alongside other guests, she would talk over them, especially younger women, and physically turn her back on anyone stealing attention. If someone else got a laugh, Davis would visibly seethe, strategizing how to reclaim the spotlight. Her presence was a performance, but not always a pleasant one. Backstage, the situation worsened. Davis reportedly demanded whiskey before every appearance, and under the influence, her comments often turned offensive. Several crew members recalled her using racist and sexist language that shocked even by 1970s standards. One makeup artist said Davis refused her services, claiming she needed someone whose hands don't shake like they're coming off a 3-day drunk. The turning point came when Davis publicly berated a cue card holder for working too slowly during rehearsal. Carson, who typically avoided confrontation, quietly stepped in. "Miss Davis," he said, "on this show we speak to everyone with respect, or we don't speak at all." Davis, stunned, backed down. Carson admired her talent, but was exhausted by her presence. "No one should have to be cross-examined by Bette Davis without a lawyer," he joked to Ed McMahon. After one final difficult appearance in the early 80s, Johnny made it clear she wouldn't be invited back. In the end, Davis's brilliance on screen couldn't mask the turmoil she created off it, something even Carson couldn't tolerate forever.